Before we start today's episode, let me tell you about my latest adventure. Introducing Lux Coffee Co., a specialty-grade coffee company inspired by creativity and creatives. The debut range is sourced from some of the best farms in Brazil, Peru, Colombia, and Africa, offering beautiful flavors and notes. Our single origins and house blends are roasted every Monday for next day shipping. Visit luxcoffee.co.uk and use code PODCAST for 15% off your first order. And yes, there's exceptional merch too. Lux Coffee Co. is where art meets exceptional coffee.
Inner peace was always there. I had absolute comfort in personality and the personal work that I was creating, some of which could be quite raw, always has been. But I certainly doubted myself on a professional level, yeah. On an emotional and personal level, no, never. On a professional level, yeah, just in the sense that it was new and there were things beyond my control, as in market trends and the economy and all those things that we can't control. But what the inner peace gave me was the confidence to throw myself into situations and trust that I would find my way through.
Hello and welcome to Creativity for Sale podcast, a show to help you start and grow your life-changing creative career and business. My name is Radim and creativity changed my life. You see, I believe creativity can change your life too. I even wrote a book about it and it inspired this podcast. I've set out to interview the world's most brilliant creatives, designers, writers, musicians, makers and marketeers about their life-changing experiences with creativity. If you ever wanted to know how people go from their humble beginnings to the pinnacle of their success, our conversation should provide you with an intimate look into triumphs, challenges and untold stories behind their creative endeavors. We also discuss the highs and lows of creative careers and creative life. So, thank you for joining me on this exploration of passion, creativity, innovation and the boundless potential within us all. Let creativity change your life. Are you ready? My guest today is an illustrator, author and host of the Creative Condition podcast, a weekly show exploring all aspects of creativity and the human condition. His illustration work has been described as organic, energetic and impactful. His written word is seen as timely insight into the pivotal role of creativity during tumultuous times. This is the final episode of season 1 and I can't think of a more fitting guest to see us off. It's my pleasure to introduce Ben Tallon. Hi Ben, welcome to the show.
Hello, how are you doing?
I'm grand. I'm super excited because this has been a long-awaited away fixture for you after you hosted me on your podcast, not just once but twice in your history. And we've touched on quite a few interesting points. So for those who may have not heard of you, which I doubt is anyone, would you quickly introduce yourself?
Yeah, of course. I'm Ben Tallon. I'm an illustrator predominantly, but these days it's just getting broader and broader. So I also write a lot now. Got 2 non-fiction books. I host the Creative Condition podcast and starting to edge into kind of more speaking. And well, I've done speaking for a long time, but coaching off the back of that. So just very passionate about creativity, and that's taken me down a whole new host of roads.
Would you say with your 16-year experience in the creative industry, is it sign of times that we don't have linear careers? No, you're no longer an illustrator. Is it survival? Is it curiosity? What is it that we do more than one thing?
I think for me, I've always been this way to a degree. I can't remember a time. Maybe the first 2 years I was fully focused on becoming an illustrator and maintaining an illustration career. But beyond that, quite quickly after that, I began moonlighting in other places and creeping into independent music business and setting up little side projects there. And I think that stems from a mix of curiosity and passion. And I think I just fell in love with art college and the variation and all those interesting people in the same building doing something they cared about more than we did at school. And I've always followed that thread. I think I've always been quite good at denying that logical brain that goes, no, you need to be making money from this because that's what you do. And it isn't that I haven't paid attention to that. It's just that I make that coexist with my natural curiosity because there's just too much magic that way for me. So I have to follow that thread, and I've regretted it, even though at times I've gone through a little bit of bumpy financial roads to get to something better. But now at 41, I'm just the same. Nothing's changed. Even with kids, still find ways to diversify and keep following it. I've never sought a diagnosis for ADHD. I suspect I might be somewhere very close to it, if not there. And maybe that's got something to do with it. I have to keep moving in it because I know myself well enough to know that if I'm, and this was the same at school, if I'm not passionate, I'm not engaged with the subject, cannot apply myself, cannot focus.
Do you think, you just touched on something, ADHD, do you think actually there might be the status quo? Because I think, just like yourself, I think, is it the sign of times? Because we can do more, we can learn more, we put patience to the side, and obviously we're going much, much faster to where we want to be. And I think, although, for example, you and I have got very similar careers, I just feel like a lot of people are now being diagnosed. A lot of people are coming to terms that who we are potentially have that condition. Because what you've described for maybe a couple of years, just focusing on what you did initially and then try to find the magic in all of the processes. I just feel like, hey, the world is very intoxicating. Like, it's just what is out there. I always try to label it as a Disneyland because it's freaking awesome. It can be anything, anywhere, anytime. And are we doing too much, or is it just a no? What do you think? Because when you think about it, it's like a bit like emotional intelligence. Emotional intelligence wasn't exactly at the forefront of our minds even 5 or 6 years ago or 10 years ago. But we are more clued up about creative processes and how we work and how we should treat one another. And I feel like with what we now call ADHD, is it the norm? Because there's a hell of a people being labeled ADHD that didn't really fall into that sort of diagnosis years ago.
I think it's a combination of awareness of neurodiversity. And I think I think in our industries, I think is absolutely the status quo. I meet so many people, and I think that, so this came up in an interesting chat with Ben Mottershead, who is co-founder of Studio BND, which stands for But Never Dull. And Ben's ADHD, so he talked in depth about this, and he said that one of the reasons there's a lot of people with ADHD in the design industry is because of the high reward frequency, because much like I said there, like the whole studying for an exam over a number of weeks, but I think I'd be better at that now, but I would have to still love the topic. But he said that, he's the guy in the office who can be taking 3 phone calls, answering emails, can be doing all these things at once. He's your man when it comes to that stuff. If you need single focus and proper focus, then forget about it. And I find that very interesting, and that high reward frequency thing really stood out to me. And I think it's true. The days when I feel really validated and good about what I've done that day is when I've ticked a lot of boxes and I've been on one of those kind of full assault days where I've got clarity of mind and I'm just nailing tasks for fun. But I think you're right. I think you're onto something with the status quo. I think that neurodiversity is probably going to be very high in jobs that are led by creativity, because that's what enables the brain to behave a little differently and see the layers in the world.
It feels like there's too many temptations because you kind of multitask and you think like job lists or like to-do tasks. Like, there's a lot more than it ever has been. We are 21st century creatives with the additional layers of Instagrams and LinkedIn's and whatever, and a cult of personality that's still, much to the forefront of who we try to be. And I'm sure you get a lot of times people asking, like, how do you do it? You've got kids and you do this. Like, how do you do all of this? And you're thinking, it gets a little bit easier when you do it over and over and over again. And obviously you need to find the processes, because you can't have the laborious task of doing everything like you did 16 years ago, which is, maybe I should do 7 different versions and see what we think about. On your career journey from last 16 years ago, we published your first book, Champagne and Wax Crayons. This is where I first became aware of your work. And at that time, publishing a book, I wouldn't say brave, but it was quite an honest book about your career so far, but it was very, very open. How did you find that whole process? Because I know it was from your blog and from sharing online, like how you actually found everything. Did you ever worry about how people see your world and how people see you on the outside? Because with most creatives, we quite like to be behind closed doors, or it used to be in the past.
No, it's a simple answer. No, I was very comfortable and very happy doing that. And I think because it was very authentic, you were almost bulletproof. At least I felt bulletproof because it was complete honesty. And I always took a lot of joy from a very young age, maybe 13, 14. I took a lot of joy from the catharsis of just opening up and letting that all out there and having it come back from other people. I attribute that to meeting a certain group of friends at around 14 who just took me right out of that fitting in thing that you do at school. And these guys were just a lot of the time they could be complete dickheads, but in a really lovable way, and be there for each other when we had romantic issues. We would be there for each other, and we would, that maybe it's a very male trait, but that very taking the piss out of each other humour, that was there from day one, but it was never backbiting, it was never snide, and it was always everything on the table, and we loved each other as much as we gave each other shit. And what that instilled in me was a complete inner peace at a really early age, at a really formative time, that time when I felt completely lost like most teenagers do, and you don't have any sense of self. And I certainly didn't have any confidence in terms of girls. I couldn't look one in the eye at that point. And what that then gave me was the ability to walk into art college with inner peace and then just go, oh, shit, and here's another tribe that I love, and go in there and just be me. And ever since, it's brought people into my field that they seem to be authentic, or at least some might take their time more than others. But I always admired that in other people. Storytelling, I realised around my late 30s that I've always had a writer's brain, and storytelling underpins all of my biggest loves in life and has done since as long as I can remember. Therefore, being able to tell those stories and make people laugh with a story that should really embarrass me is really disarming and really empowering. And I just found that it created a lot of authentic relationships, which has been brilliant in this industry.
I think you said two things. You said inner peace and making people laugh. It's quite deep. That self-deprecation is a very English trait and works fantastically. It's one of the things I absolutely love about this country. But you talked about inner peace in a way that talks about almost confidence on a level that we don't always carry into the creative world, because most of creators will be looking for external validation. I think we often use creativity as a prop for some sort of unresolved issues, some childhood traumas, whatever. Like there's, if you were to throw a brick in the air, you would only hit one extrovert and everyone else would be an introvert, because at least self-proclaimed introverts, because we are never really sure what we're creating. Like we're never really sure if it's right or not, because the guidelines are not there unless you create a checkbook design or I don't know, I'm thinking timetable. Obviously there's some rules, but most of it is very open. And it's like the creativity in that respect is an untamed beast. You can chop off as many tentacles, but they're still growing back and they're still suffocating you in that way. When you started on your illustrative work, inner peace, was it there? Or was that turmoil? Did you ever doubt yourself, like you're doing the right thing or not?
We'll be back after a quick break.
If you're enjoying this podcast and would like more support and information on your creative journey, you can pick up one of my books to help you do just that. My titles cover branding, graphic design, illustration, all the way to career business advice with ideas how to navigate the highs and lows of the creative process. You can pick up signed paperbacks at no extra cost from my store at novemberuniverse.co.uk, and we are shipping worldwide. Use code PODCAST for extra 10% off your order, and you can find the links in the show notes. Any day should be a new book day.
Inner peace was always there. I had absolute comfort in personality and the personal work that I was creating, some of which could be quite raw, always has been. But I certainly doubted myself on a professional level, yeah. On an emotional and personal level, no, never. On a professional level, yeah, just in the sense that it was new and there were things beyond my control, as in market trends and the economy and all those things that we can't control. But what the inner peace gave me was the confidence to throw myself into situations and trust that I would find my way through. Once I was full-time and I was going for it, the idea of it not being a thing anymore when I wasn't trained in anything else was quite terrifying, and is to this day. And I think that's a big driver in my constant diversification, because I'm afraid of the day when I end up back at the job agency, not qualified for anything other than what I've been doing for 16 years. That's a scary idea.
Would you say that's your main driver about not ever needing to go back? Because if people say, what's the definition of success? Not going to definitely not going to my old job. It was 22 years ago. I definitely don't want to go back to that one. But I think it's that drive, because when you think about the peaks and troughs, it was Joshua Davis who once said that being successful made him less creative. Like being successful was like you don't necessarily develop your own style, you necessarily push yourself forward because you're busy working on clients. And with the sort of progress of a sort of commercial illustrator, you can now, if things are going too well, sometimes we might be just a little bit too complacent. Like you necessarily don't think I need to diversify. I think it's our main driver not to want to go back to our previous jobs, because no one really wants to go back to a fish and chip shop or making kebab shop.
Yeah, on a logical, practical level, yeah, 100% the best driver. I mean, as I've got older, I've found more cause and personal belonging in what I do, which has become a chief driver. I don't even know if I'd say complacency, but I think that what happens with success is that you end up so busy, just in terms of sheer volume of work and gravity of clients, that you end up, and this is so common in most visual communication fields, or anything, music, it's all the same. You end up not making enough time for what I term as emotional creativity rather than the intellectual creativity, which is the commercial stuff. And we've all been guilty of not making time for personal work or those personal lines of inquiry. But that's where you grow. That's where you are able to operate and find better flow states without risks and get really excited about something because it means something to you as opposed to the client that you're attempting to make happy. And I think that when you lose that balance of the two, of intellectual and emotional creativity, then it can be tricky to get back there, and you have to put small steps in place to do that. But it is something I've always placed a huge value on. Like I said earlier, is following that curiosity and making work that is just for me and not over worrying about how it's going to look on Instagram or not getting caught up in that horrible algorithmic thing. And using my own voice and just not being afraid to explore something that seems ridiculous. I've got countless ridiculous projects, but I always loved hearing stories about those from other people. It's one of the reasons I wanted to get into illustration, because all my tutors would sit in the pub at lunchtime and talk about just projects that were so obscure or so niche that it was just beautiful.
It depends on your style, so your illustrative style, and your sort of typography and stuff. When you actually have that work, and then you have to align it with the professional world and, as you said, market trends. How much have you evolved from the beginning to where you are now? Because it seems to me like you've been Ben Tallon, solid Ben Tallon, who didn't necessarily feel like you have to bend your style, adapt it to market trends, obviously advertising trends, what you do. But how firm and confident were you with what you were creating? Because I mean, when you say emotional creativity, I think you were bringing that into your professional world. So how confident were you that this is going to work?
Very confident. It took about 18 months to get the very first threads of what you see now. So the first 18 months or so, I was chipping away at, it was a style that I had envisioned, but couldn't execute technically. So what you got was these very clunky acrylic background with line drawing directly onto the acrylic. It just wasn't working. It didn't have any flow to it. And I was also partially guilty of seeing a lot of a certain kind of collage style in a lot of the main press at the time was being commissioned and being just slightly waylaid by trends in that naivety of the early career. And it was Danny Allison, who's a very close friend of mine and had been illustrating for 2 years before I got started, who moved into my studio at the time. I say studio, it was a freezing cold ex-cotton mill with thick stone floors. And it's a squat more than a studio, but beside the point, we shared desks next to each other. And he said to me, he said, "Can I ask you a really honest question?" I said, "Yeah." And he said, "When did you stop drawing? Because at uni, your drawing was second to none. And this collage stuff you're doing is not great. It's nowhere near the stuff that you seem to like." And it was a very frank question, but I've always been able to take criticism. In fact, I consciously seek criticism all the time. And I said, "That's a really good question. And only now that you've said it, have I consciously recognized that I have stopped drawing." So I got rid of all the background stuff and the colours, and I stripped it right back down to black and white with spot colour. If I'm honest, because I was scared of colour. I hadn't learned how to technically use it. I hadn't learned enough about it. But what that did was it forced me to be very conscious about what my line work was doing and what that colour was chosen for and what it meant. And from that point forward, never any fear. I'm a big believer in community and feedback, and having those guys in that room and Danny around me at that time was pivotal, because I'd struggled after uni. The cut-off from tutorial input for 7 years and colleagues and studio space was a crash landing for me. I didn't realise how much I'd miss all that stuff. So to end up on a bedroom B&Q garden table with the rain pelting against the window as I wrote about in champagne and wax crayons, it was a crash landing, and I was working full-time. I wasn't motivated. Once I tapped into that style, suddenly it felt good inside, and I've never looked back, and I've always had the utmost confidence and filled the majority of my portfolio with personal work to this day, despite having a relatively strong client list.
I think those kind of beginnings and the formative years, when you talk about it almost feels like they are so far detached from where we are now, because it's just, I think we carry our sort of experiences differently. When you talk about the cutoff period where it was you had 7 years of input, and then you were on your own, it makes it feel scary for a second, because you feel detached from it. But then, would you say you blink it? You need to make this work. You work on your career, and you got your inner peace, you got your confidence, and you found your style. And I think great, well done to Danny Ellison for asking that question, because I know other illustrators who are now very famous for one style, which was never their first idea. Like, they're doing completely different things. And I think when you find your own feet, it just feels so rewarding. I have to congratulate you, because around that time, what you said 16 years ago, obviously it was heavily collaged. I was one of the people making the collage. Very full on color. Unless it was every color under the sun, the job wasn't done. I could never see that thing stopping when you're in the middle of it. And when it stopped, you're like, oh, absolutely, yeah, this had to stop. Like, we always had these sort of weird ways of working. But kind of brings me to collage. And my next question is that, when you think about it, we used a lot of other people's stuff, right? You had cutouts, you had whatever you can scrape from Google Images. Like, I remember using all sorts of things that cropped up on other people's pieces. Like Photoshop was everyone's friend. We're like, okay, I'm a collage artist. I remember cutting out pieces from stock imagery from really crappy sites and iStock. And then we were putting this stuff together. Fast forward to 2024, and everyone's up in arms about generative AI and a scraping of data and imagery. And I'm thinking, what are we actually really upset about it? Because we've been doing this consciously for decades, if not like hundreds of years. We've been taking other people's stuff, remixing it, using it. And now we are up in arms about generative AI and machine learning algorithms, scraping data to do pretty much what we were doing, which is going to be used by somebody else. So I know you're very much in the middle of pondering out loud the role of AI in our work and in our sort of current present. So do you see that link between the intentional scraping and just the scraping behind our backs?
Yeah, completely. Oh God, yeah, you summed it up perfectly. Yeah, of course. I'll tell you where's an interesting space to look at this, and it's the kind of really low end of editorial. So the people who never had budgets to commission illustrators. So I'm talking about local news and kind of free magazines and things like that. It's quite interesting, because this is a bit of a godsend, I think, for that area. And it's not really depriving us of work, because they were never able to use illustrators in the first place. Maybe the same for photographers. I know some mags don't have any photography budget anymore, so it all has to be stock. So I guess it's another outlet for those people. I don't know. That's a rabbit hole to get into, isn't it? But there is definitely a hypocrisy risk if we're not careful there to a degree. Yeah. I think we don't know. I think it's fear more than anything else, isn't it, at the moment? Because we don't know. We don't truly know what this scraping means, where it's going to end up. Will people even want to use images without creativity? They will, and people will have to that don't have the budgets. But I still think that creativity is going to be valued, and people are going to want to work with a human.
When you think about life and creativity and projects and editorials, there's a lifespan to everything. And kind of we feel like when we start something, that this is it, this is us for good, especially if you get something really good in creative work. Let's say you got illustration style, it makes you money, makes you, let's say, famous, and it works. We got to think about it like, okay, so this is my work, this is my universe, and you're protective of it. Only to realize that somebody somewhere else is doing something similar, or somebody in the past did something similar, and you're like, no, this is my original idea. Like, no one touch it. And you are happy to fight people on the internet like, this is my original then you realize you better shut up because it's definitely not original, but this is mine, and you're very protective about it. But then we grow older and we realize you have to reinvent yourself a little bit. Like, you can't just expect to be one thing over and over again. I mean, with AI, the way things are happening to us, I think they're way too fast for us to understand what it all means. And unfortunately, in the world of snackable content, like the bite-sized information where people read a headline and they get their feathers up and go, let's fight, make it to the small print. Let's actually see what's underneath it. What does it mean to you? Because so many things happen to us. You see people that have been threatened. And I think it is insecurity because we worry about resources. Like, this is my patch. Don't get on my patch. What's going to happen? With the AI, where are we now? Where are we currently with the mass hysteria?
I don't know. As we laughed about earlier, I did an emergency episode panicking about it a little bit. And then the following week, did another episode kind of calming down a little bit. So I've stepped off a little bit because I just realized that I'm going to feel different about it some days more than others. But I don't know. I do think there'll come a point where it just becomes another part of our toolkit. And that's what it's going to be eventually. It will be assimilated into systems. Of course, there's going to be casualties. Certain jobs are going to be lost. I think it was Andrew Davis on a recent episode on my podcast who is a digital and social media sort of marketer and trainer. And he said, look, that's tech's job. That's what it's always been there to do, is take jobs and bring convenience about. So that's not really changed. I think it's revolutionary in the sense of the sheer pace and power of it. But I think it's the human voice. You hit up on something interesting there about the sort of patch and personal space and IP. I think that was only really ours when it carried our voice as a unique human. Otherwise, I was under no illusions when I started painting lettering that there were tens of thousands of other people painting lettering, some of them doing it really well, better than me invariably. But I had to make it mine. I had to find my own nuances and trust that I could find the market. Not only that, but I could bring my individual personality and build relationships so that people would want me to do that. Because A, they liked working with me, and B, the style carried enough of me to make it, I'm not even going to say unique, but desirable. So that's the way I've seen it, especially when it comes to the hand lettering. But it's the same with the writing and the storytelling. Yeah, there's tech tools that can do all of it, really. If you're looking at it surface deep in terms of, can it replicate, can it do that style? Yeah, of course it can. So, and if not, it's going to be there very soon. But can it look at it through the same weird lens with my unique journey? No. And I don't think it ever will, at least not in the same way that people want to consume it. I certainly have no interest in reading a book that's written by a robot. So I think that there's a lot of conversations that we're going to keep having, but I think the jury's still out, but I'm not as frightened as I was. It's sped up my own need to get where I'm going and do it my way.
Yeah, because I think you hit on quite a few interesting points. But when you think about it, it's almost like a powerful calculator, like a calculator on steroids. It feels like in your episode that you did, the emergency podcast, and you say, like, why does it keep happening? And I think it's driven by capitalism, because AI, and I had this conversation internally with some staff at Adobe, were using AI in their applications for a very long time. They just didn't call it AI, and they had the word sensei for it. But when DALL-E and Midjourney came out, it was like, very much, this is generative AI. And you could see that the gun was shot. And obviously the race has started properly, because it was just a change of wording. We all put it there because the share price is going to go up because we're using AI, but therefore we keep in stuck with everything. And you're thinking, like, why do we keep turning everything to 11 pretty much every week? Oh yeah, because somebody else is turning things to 11. That's the same with like social media and the autoplay of videos. Was it Facebook came up with like autoplay of videos? All right, YouTube's not going to start autoplaying videos. Okay, we're going to start autoplay videos on Twitter. Just because somebody had the idea and that gave them more retention on their platform with more user, like, okay, we're going to do it here, we're going to do it there. And is it really that necessary? Because when you think about it, that's our careers as well. Because, oh, that person's now animated. Maybe I need to animate. Maybe I need to do this. It's the versatility. We can do this. And I'm going back to my point, like, we can do so much more than we did ever before. But unfortunately, there's so much more of us doing many more things. And sometimes we just lose the focus of our own soul and our output. What is it I really want to do? Whereas now you've got this sort of public picture of creativity. It's like, be a content creator, do this. You're like, how is this going to age? What is if we are on the way somewhere, where is it taking us? Because obviously you and I, slightly longer in the tooth, and many others who listen to our podcasts have that 20-year, 10, 15-year career behind us that we were very much primarily about the output. Like we didn't particularly care who we were, how we were perceived. It was the work. The work was doing talking for us. Whereas now we get creatives who do more talking than the actual creative work, and they pretty much say the same stuff. All of them. I'm generalizing here because I'm not watching every real film from every person, but I would rather see something different. But anyway, what is your view on this? Would you agree that there's a dumbing down of creativity?
I do agree. Yeah, I do agree. Yeah. And I think that I've got an interview coming up with Kyle Chaker, who I've been obsessing over his book called Filter World. And it's called Filter World, How Algorithms Flattened Culture. And it speaks to all of this. It talks about how we've been led down this very narrow avenue of satisfying algorithms, of providing the expected to get engagement and all of these metrics which revolve around attention. And I'm not saying that people are out there just attention seeking, but too many of us, particularly the less experienced ones, are chasing those metrics, and it rewards conformity. And that's very dangerous. I know you had Max Ottignon on your show recently. I've got an episode from D&AD that I did with him live coming up and talking about those same things, about that sea of same. And it's refreshing to hear a lot of conversations going on around it at the moment and literature coming out around it. It means that there's a growing awareness. But that awareness seems to be coming from people who are maybe north of 35 and up, and there's a certain integrity with that generation. And I think that goes back to something you said earlier. And maybe it's because we had time to think a little bit during our formative days. So there was a bit more specialism and there was a bit more craft. I think of people like Sagmeister, who I interviewed recently. I admired his sheer professionalism. And what I got from Stefan was there was no arrogance whatsoever, no ego, just sheer love of the craft. But he's very serious about his craft too. And he would tell you something shit, as I saw him in motion up in the gallery upstairs in Barcelona, and they were very funny, by the way. But I grew up admiring all those mentors of mine, those tutors and those people in industry for that fiery passion over their craft, and I wanted to have the same thing. Therefore, all of that other stuff was secondary, and when I was getting started, it wasn't even a thing because it was the very earliest days of Facebook. So there were no algorithms. It was still human content curation at that point. I think we need to get a degree of that back. I don't think it's going to happen anytime soon because I think there's such power in those platforms. But I think that it certainly has, in Kyle's words, flattened culture to a degree. And I think that we have to work hard to find the interesting stuff at the moment.
The algorithm loves the sameness. It was like that. There's a person who likes this. We're going to bombard them with this. Where are we going to go? What do you think?
Me personally, I'm trying to strip it back a bit and worry less about that stuff and get back to a bit more personal connection. And I was listening to one of your bite-size episodes the other day, one of your advice episodes, and you mentioned about emailing a person a day. And I thought that was interesting because I fluctuate. I'll go through periods with no correspondence. Then I'll get annoyed with myself and I'll think, well, do 10 a day, and then maybe that's a bit too much. And it's kind of like, I liked the one a day thing because it reminded me that it's about relationships and it's about checking in with people and taking the time to actually generate something worth having a conversation about. So email newsletters, again, are a beautiful medium. And this is something that at the end of his book, it's one of the things that Kyle talks about, breaking out of those algorithms and getting back to kind of quirky personal newsletters from people you actually want to hear from. And I think Substack's been reasonably good for that. And there is a sort of personal feeling to that as well. I've wrestled with the idea that I don't want to be on all platforms all of the time. Like, I can't sustain it. And it's something you said earlier, and it's about the sheer volume of the world and all the things out there, the sensory overload. I don't think we're designed for that. And in fact, we're not, are we? Let's face it. I think it's more or less scientifically proven that our brains and souls, to a degree, we're not designed to manage that amount of sensory input. I think now with the pure algorithmic curation of all these platforms, I'm starting to wonder what the value really is. Like you said, there are results here and there, and I still make occasional connections, but I particularly like LinkedIn at the moment because it's a bit more business, less political bullshit, and People are on there doing their thing in our industry, I've found it quite fertile grounds for actually having all right conversations with people and sharing my stuff. But really, I don't know. That's the answer. But I am trying to, I think you have to be in control of it. I think that's the overriding thing. You have to know yourself well enough to know what you can handle, how much of it you should be using, and try to audit what is the value of doing it and putting those hours into it. Because you only live once. It's that whole philosophy of, you should only be answerable to your childhood self and your deathbed self. And I actually use that filter quite a lot now. So when I'm setting out and when I catch myself on these platforms, and I don't scroll much, but if I find myself on there or opening a tab out of habit, I quite quickly stop and think, okay, deathbed self, eye to eye, is this a justifiable use of your life right now? Usually the answer is no.
I like a deathbed self. I like reevaluation of our available time. I remember reading 4,000 Weeks by Oliver Bergman. We've got in 80 years is 4,000 weeks. And everyone's reaction is that all? Because we just feel like there's always going to be tomorrow, right? There's always that sort of that naive positivity, like, oh yeah, of course there's going to be tomorrow. Whereas I had to delete the apps. I mean, LinkedIn is the biggest bastard of them all. It was like, someone just farted in Venezuela. Here's a notification. I was just like, fuck off. Literally like the worst of the worst. So LinkedIn's gone, Instagram's gone. Literally, like Facebook, I haven't checked on Facebook in years, but it's the value for the shareholder. It's the value for the company that you are on it. On a desktop, I've got a Chrome plugin that it doesn't show me the timeline. Like I have to go there because it's designed to catch you. It's basically so easily digestible. And because we are such nosy people, like those beings, they're like, oh, what's that? And you keep scrolling, and they've got you like, oh shit, I've lost another 10 minutes on this, on stuff I didn't need to know. You talked on your podcast about how going to a basic rudimentary phone, and you said, well, I want WhatsApp on it. I'm like, how do we actually live outside that zone? Because you want to be connected only to have a look in, but then we're worried that we're going to miss some connections or some opportunities because people got no patience. So it's the positive habits. I just believe that a little bit of how you start your day and what you do with it and kind of sort of slice it out makes a lot more sense than just going, yeah, let's panic about new work now. Let's ignore people now, because it just gives you, more of a connection rather than just talking to a wall of thumbnails.
Yeah. And the time does just slip by. They're £1 million systems designed to hijack evolutionary needs. I had an interesting term recently as evolutionary mismatch, and it's behaviors that used to benefit us that now trip us up, or vice versa. I heard one that it was about gambling, and it was about it hijacking the kind of risk-reward system. So particularly, let's say, times when we were foraging and there was scarcity of food, it was to risk it for a nice bit of fruit or to get to the next meal. And in this life, especially in this country and in developed countries where we're not going hungry on a daily basis, we don't have that so much. So that kind of risk-reward thing is hijacked other places. And it's also an evolutionary need to be loved for who we truly are, which emanates from when we existed in smaller tribes, and it would heighten our chances of survival if we were valued for who we were, what we were good at, what we brought to the party. And social media does the best job you can imagine at hijacking that system, but with a very vacuous, unfulfilling version that keeps us chasing after it. And I think it's tragic. And if you're not careful, going back to the deathbed self, it really can consume catastrophic amounts of time and be a symptom of the collapse of a career if you're not careful. Because when you look back, I've been guilty of it in the past and I'm much better than I was, but I've still got some way to go. And going to systems and organization, like you said, that's not antithetical to creativity. Actually, as we said before, it's a great enabler. Because, again, going back to the ADHD thing, we all have these kind of relatively interesting brains, whether they're neurodiverse or not. So if you can't control it and give yourself some systems and some guardrails, then where are you going to get time to really enjoy that spontaneity that we need in creativity to go and actually focus on a task at hand if you've not taken care of all the nuts and bolts that you need to run a business?
With your busy schedule, how do you separate the times of the day that you can actually be a podcaster, illustrator, a parent, a dad? How do you do it?
I'm relatively responsive, but I have had to work to implement more focus time. If I've got full mental clarity, and I hit the ground running in the morning. I can sometimes have those days where I'll nail lots of things from lots of different areas and get ahead on a lot of things. But most days now, I need to go, well, the morning is for this, and pick a task, do my couple of emails, do my whatever I need to be done, account, and then I get into whatever the thing is. Of course, with the podcast, I've got a schedule, comes out every Wednesday at 5 a.m. So I tend to do that around like a Friday or the Monday afternoon. I do a half day on a Monday. But really, it's making sure I give each task the right amount of focus and allow myself to really get into it, to do it properly. I'll sometimes use the odd evening to do the podcast. It's just a bit of personal organisation, really. I don't want to bore people by going into the nuts and bolts of it, but it's about recognising what needs my focus and attention and giving it the due time and setting the right conditions for it, including the environment and the headspace. And sometimes if I'm not particularly feeling a certain thing and it's not time sensitive, I'll move on to what I am feeling. Or if I need rest, I'm a little bit more forgiving and giving myself a bit more rest these days. Still got a long way to go on that one. But I am recognising more the need for mental downtime and idling and just allowing yourself to process a bit. Because like we said earlier, it's not natural to go 24/7. And because if you do that, you'll never have those truly great ideas because the unconscious mind doesn't have time to do its job.
I've been reading an incredible book which was recommended to me. It's called Courage to be Disliked. If you've never heard of it, it's an incredible book that goes very much through the motion of a student and a philosopher having a conversation over a number of different nights. And it touches on so many subjects that we talk about here, the creativity, and it's passing on the information on the youth. So we talked about the visual heritage being passed on to the new generations, and we're hoping that it will work out. But I believe you're working on something similar at the moment and creative coaching that's hopefully going to change a few people's lives.
I hope so. I've always, as long as I can remember, I've cared about people. I'm a highly sensitive person. Not in the sense that I do get upset by something, but not in the sense of offence or rattled by people. I've got a very kind of, like I said earlier, very cutthroat humour, and I love all that back and forth. I'm fine with all that stuff. But I'm very attuned to my environment. I'm very sensitive in my world, which is what makes me good at my job. But as long as I can remember, I've always cared about people. I've been always willing to talk to the person in the street who just wants to talk to a stranger, or balls, weirdos, whatever you want to call them. I've always had time for them and found them interesting. And so when it came to friends and people that I do know, I'll give everything. I've always been very giving, always been very interested in people. And it's one of the biggest joys I've taken from my job. And actually, funny thing to say 16 years into a career as an illustrator, but I don't know if illustration has ever consistently delivered on giving me that. When I go into good design agencies where there's a really good kind of rapport and a good energy and people are really invested in what's going on there, I feel quite jealous because it shows me something that I had at college that I've never really had as a kind of lone wolf as an illustrator. I've had snatches of it. I've got a wonderful agency who represent me. I've had clients along the way where I've got a 2-week burst of a project where I get that. I think to a degree that's what I'm looking for from coaching. Creativity has become my life's cause, not just work cause. I find it, I've always been in love with it. I find it truly fascinating. I think we're going to need a hell of a lot of it to fix the world's problems that we're facing. So it's become my way of addressing that and working through a few personal insurmountables. And by accident and serendipity, the last 10 years I've spent researching this topic. First the podcast, then the book, The Creative Condition. It's bringing me to a place where I'm spending so much time on it that I have to start trying to find ways to monetize it because I live under capitalism. And it's, okay, how can I do that in a holistic way where I'm going to help people? Because I love the people in my industry, but I also want to help people beyond to just understand and embrace their creativity. Because I think what I'm really doing is helping them to understand themselves as humans. I'm charting this big anatomy of creativity map at the moment. It's fucking huge. It looks like one of those kind of beautiful mind equations. It's ridiculous. But I love it. I love breaking it all down and understanding it. And over 300 conversations on this show now, and what it's given me is an incredibly broad set of reference points from psychologists, from neuroscientists, from athletes, from all these people. And I'm starting to see all the consistencies and package it in a way that I can help people. And that is giving me just a hell of a thrill. It's why I love having all these kind of conversations, because I'm just learning about the human condition. So I want to try to help people with that while cherry picking the kind of illustration and visual art projects. And I'd be a very happy man if I can find that space.
Study yourself. That's one of the most important things that I think it comes with age and comes with time, because we don't necessarily know what we're doing when we start. We try to survive and paddle and keep above the water. And I think it was Simon Dixon who recently posted like, oh yeah, if you want to do better work, study people. And I was like, yeah, that reminds me, I wrote a chapter that says gallery versus the high street. Go on the high street, see people being dickheads. What do they do? How do they do it? What do they buy? What carry bags have they got? So with your creative methods and your coaching, is there any particular style you're going to employ, or is it going to be doing agencies, groups, or individuals? Why should people contact you straight away?
It's going to be the only way I can do anything, which is this raw style that runs through everything that I do as a human. I think in terms of a USP and why people would want to work with me, I think it probably comes down to, well, there's a couple of reasons. Like I said, I love to help people. I have done since being a kid. It gives me great joy. So there would be great relationship building. I want to implement it on 3 fronts. That's my plan. So one of them, so there'll be 3 ways. Longer term, there's going to be one-to-one coaching, taking on clients for, let's say, 6 months or a year, and establishing a flow of working with them, modules on specific areas and identifying blind spots and the likes. That's going to take a bit more time to develop. The 2 that are close to being ready at the moment, there's going to be a session that I can take into businesses, the creative condition talk, and then into a day's worth of exercises and working with a team of people to work on certain bits from the talk, which is about the anatomy of creativity and helping people to understand it as being more than simple artistry. So I want to work with businesses on that level and help them from the top down to understand the importance of and the nature of creativity, and then work on specifics with them in a one-dayer. And the third one is going to be what I'm calling a pit stop. And that's going to be an intensive one-to-one session with individuals, working through this anatomy of creativity, working through all the points, a full audit of their situation, their frustrations, their hopes, their dreams, their fears, their circumstances, behavior traps, all of those things. I love the psychology of all of it. And then providing recommended notes at the end of it, things to work on. And then this map and this worksheet that I'm developing, which enables them to continue the work. So to leave that session and not feel like, yeah, I've just seen a good talk or whatever it might be and done a good session, but I've forgotten most of it and it was good, but blah, blah, blah. I wanted to be able to refer back to everything that I've said and then have access to me, limited access, but to be able to come back and work back through things and kind of recap and build relationships. But also, young kids, like I want to work with educators and get into sort of schools with kids from backgrounds who've had tough starts. What we're seeing at the moment in this country is very, very troubling in terms of the racism, people out there causing damage on the streets. It's very scary. It's very upsetting. I also see the reasons why people behave like that. It comes from a lack of purpose, a lack of belonging, alienation, lack of community, things that have gone wrong in our society. And some of it is a symptom of social media and the things that we talked about in the creative sphere, but more in the human sphere and the disconnect and all that stuff. Don't want to get into that too much right now. I think I want to help young kids who have not quite got there but are at risk of doing so. I've seen some amazing projects and talked to people who've done youth movements and just turned lives around through simple tools about belonging and creativity. So I would also really like to work in that area, and I've got many conversations going and hopefully going to make that happen too. So it's very exciting. And I do think there's a great need for creativity and an understanding of it.
You mentioned the word audit quite a few times in this conversation. And as creatives, we don't always want to know what we do wrong. We don't always want to know what the past was. We think that when we keep going forward, it will fix itself. Like we don't need to do too much. Only to find out that what got us here won't get us there. Like we really need actually shake up. And in your career, 16 years ago, would you ever imagine that you would not necessarily be earning from illustration, but actually go into something like teaching? Because you can feel like an alien subject. Okay, you're such a passionate person about humans. I get it from every sentence, from every answer. Did you ever feel like you were leaving something behind by doing some other things, or did it never faze you?
No, it never bothered me whatsoever. For the shortest time, I adored being an illustrator, and that I still adore being an illustrator. That's not to say I don't feel that way now. It's just that I've recognized that my creativity is king. It's not so much about any one single craft or pursuit. It's about my curiosity and my belonging and my passion and what is making me feel good. And therefore, there's no ego. If I'm going into a place where I'm doing predominantly coaching and working with people, I don't care that I won't be getting that kind of gratification that you get from sharing a nice piece of artwork and getting the praise from it. I don't care. I just like to get out of bed in the morning and feel good about what I'm doing and help people. No, so I never worried about that really, and I've just found it all very exciting. And there's many titles in there that I've never trained for. There's only illustration that I am formally trained for, so the rest of it is self-taught and just curiosity-led. And I think that there's something that doing it that way that galvanizes you. When I speak to people who are not formally trained, who don't have a degree, I don't want to describe it as a chip on the shoulder, but there is a sort of ferocity about them and a kind of, shit, they've got a degree, I don't, I got something to prove. And I think there's a degree of that when it's self-taught. It's almost like I've got a taste of this thing and I know I might be able to do it even though no one's trained me. Let's make it happen.
I think there's that sort of underdog, isn't it? It's the underdog mindset. I'm not meant to be doing this, but I'm doing it now. Ben, I've enjoyed this conversation and I'm going to finish it potentially murdering another quote. I think it was Audrey Hepburn who said, you got two hands, one to help yourself and one to help somebody else. And I think what you're doing, obviously, you build an amazing empire, you're building an amazing career by actually focusing on how to help people. And that's valuable because I'm sure you would agree that most of the time we can see that our industry is full of glory hunters. We're pushing for the top spots in blogs and whatever, and the squares and Behance and whatever. And it's like when if we're better to switch all of that around, if we're better to actually switch all of that off, I think we should do a whip around for Elon Musk and just switch off to X. Just literally just get 44 billion and just switch the fucking thing off and just really focus on actually what makes us human, get people back in pubs and actually talking. What is it that what actually makes any country amazing? Because I think we just so whipped up into this frenzy. So I salute you for your perseverance of working on your podcast for, I think it was 9 years now. So you got a flourishing career. I described your latest book as a magnum opus because I salute you for 110,000 words of writing. That's a beefy one, but you know what? It's an example to people that if they apply themselves, if they do it, and if they pursue their soul and their output and their expression, that it's there for our grabs because nobody's telling you you can't do it. No one's telling you if whatever walk of your life, if you really want this, you can get it. And there's some shining examples. And sometimes we tell ourselves that being from a different country or from different sort of societal layer, that the world is against us. But the opposite is the truth.
Yeah, thank you. That's very kind. And I think you're right. And I think that, my experience of this industry is that the majority of people are good people in the sense that we all enjoy difference. I've always found it one of the biggest thrills in this industry. My first trip to London on my own in my career, when it was 2007, when I first brought my portfolio down to London and did a trip down from Preston, stayed in a hostel for 11 quid a night in Brixton. And it was an amazing trip because it was just full of people from all over the world. I had a truly magical time when I felt quite sad sat on the train going back home. And it was just pure magic to me. And just meeting the biggest range of human beings is one of the biggest things why I love this industry. So, yeah, to your point, I think that difference is what gives you a voice and gives you the ability to do exactly what you've just described, which is make a mark and do something that matters and matters to you at least, because that's all that matters, I think, because that shines outwards. Yeah, thank you. And it's always a pleasure to chat.
I salute you on using your voice. Very well. Cheers, Ben. Cheers.
Cheers, Radim.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Creativity for Sale podcast. This show was produced and presented by me, Radim Malinich. Editing and audio production was masterfully done by Neil Mackay from 7 Million Bikes Podcasts. Theme music was written and produced by Robert Summerfield. If you enjoyed this episode and would like to support the podcast, please subscribe and leave a rating or review. To get your own action plan on how to start and grow a life-changing creative business, you can get a copy of Creativity for Sale book via the links in show notes. As always, keep those creative fires burning, and until next time, I'm Radim Malinich, your guide through this exploration of passion, creativity, innovation, and the boundless potential within us all. Hey, just a quick note to say thank you for joining me on this episode. If this is your first time or you're a regular listener, please take a minute and rate the show on your chosen platform. A short review helps every show to be more visible to new listeners and provide them with value. So thank you for helping out. Thank you.